When she said it, it happened yesterday. Only people who mattered were there. I thought I'd misheard. My hearing isn't what it used to be, but cruelty, that has its own clarity. The kind that slices through any fog, any hope you might still be clinging to. I stood in the kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, looking at the wilted roses on the counter. My son's wedding. The one I'd been waiting years for, sewing lace on a pale blue dress I never got to wear. I'd even kept the tag on, like some kind of superstition. Maybe part of me already knew. Her voice, Clara's, was sweet, but metallic. It always had that edge, that tone that said she enjoyed watching people flinch. "Don't take it personally," she added, like she was offering a tissue to a corpse. It was just a small ceremony. We didn't want any drama. Any drama. As if my presence was a disruption. As if the woman who raised the groom, who worked double shifts to pay for his degree, was now an inconvenience. I remember gripping the phone tighter, my thumb whitening against the plastic. "You mean to tell me," I said, very slowly, "that my only son got married yesterday and I wasn't even told?" Clara sighed. "It was Daniel's idea too," she said, and I heard it, the little twist of triumph in her voice. "We just wanted people who matter to us there." That line didn't stab me all at once. It seeped in, slow and cold, until I couldn't feel my own body, only the silence afterward, her smug breathing, my own shallow one. I hung up before she could say more. The phone landed on the table with a dull thud. The house was still. My cat, Juniper, watched me from the window ledge, tail flicking like a metronome. I looked around at the remnants of my waiting, the wrapped gift in the corner, the wedding card I'd rewritten 5 times trying to find the right words, the framed photo of Daniel on his graduation day. The last day he'd looked at me like I was someone worth impressing. I walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back had lines that weren't there last spring. 63 years old, though my bones felt older. Widow for 22. Retired nurse. A woman who's seen people draw their last breath and known what real pain looks like. But nothing, no death, no loss, had felt like this. This was rejection by the living. When Daniel's father died, I kept the house by sheer will, sold the car, took night shifts at the hospital, walked home in the dark with groceries digging into my palms. I told myself it was worth it, because one day, when Daniel stood tall and proud, I'd know it had meant something. I thought I'd raised him to be kind. But kindness, I've learned, doesn't always survive once comfort enters the room. The betrayal wasn't just that I'd been excluded. It was that he hadn't fought for me, didn't even warn me. My own flesh and blood had chosen convenience over conscience. I sat down at the kitchen table, hands trembling, and whispered his name like a prayer that no longer reached heaven. Daniel. Nothing answered back, just the refrigerator humming. You'd think by 63, a woman learns how to protect her heart. But betrayal doesn't hit in the chest. It lands in the gut, heavy and raw. I felt it all the way down to my spine. I tried to call him. Once, twice. No answer. On the 3rd attempt, I stopped. I wasn't going to beg for the truth. I've begged enough in this life. For mercy, for patience, for love that doesn't make you small. Instead, I made tea. That's what you do when you've got nothing left but manners. The steam rose, fogging my glasses, and I stared into it like people stare into church candles. There was a part of me, small and stubborn, that still wanted to believe this was a misunderstanding, that my son hadn't really meant it, that somehow it was her doing, not his. But I knew better. Daniel may not have said the words, but he let them stand. Silence is its own kind of cruelty. I opened the blue box on the table, the one with his father's cufflinks, the ones I'd saved for Daniel to wear on his wedding day. I'd polished them last week. I ran my thumb over the silver, thought of how his father would have looked at me now. He was a quiet man, but he'd have had a word for this kind of disrespect. Some lessons, he used to say, only life can teach the hard way. I think that's when it settled in. The humiliation wasn't just mine, it was ours. Every sacrifice, every prayer, every sleepless night for a boy who'd grown into a stranger. The clock ticked louder than usual. I didn't cry. Tears felt like giving them too much power. I just sat there, hands folded, and whispered under my breath. I wasn't invited to my son's joy. That's not a wedding. It's a funeral. And as the words left my mouth, I realized something I hadn't in years. Grief and anger are sisters. One buries you, the other digs you out. I think I was done mourning. I think I was starting to dig. The next morning, I woke before dawn. Habit, I suppose. Even after years of retirement, my body still follows the old nurse's clock. 5 a.m., no matter what. I used to like those quiet hours, the soft hum before the world wakes. But that morning, silence pressed differently, heavy, accusing. I made coffee the way I always have. 1 spoon of sugar, 2 of regret. Sat by the window and watched the streetlights blink out one by one. Every house had a light come on except mine. Funny, how a lifetime can feel that small. I thought of Daniel as a child, how he used to leave his little shoes by the door, always paired neatly together, just like his father. He'd climb into my lap and say, "When I'm big, I'll buy you a house with windows everywhere." I used to laugh, imagining sunlight pouring into every corner. And now, even with all these windows, it felt dark. The mind has a cruel way of replaying kindness when you most need cruelty. It loops the good moments as if to mock you, reminding you how far you've fallen. I raised him alone. When my husband, Samir, passed, Daniel was 14, too young to lose a father, too old to believe in comfort. We stumbled through grief together. I went back to double shifts, stitched wounds by day, and held my own together by night. I told myself I was building him a future, that every ache in my spine was a deposit in his tomorrow. People liked to say I was strong. I wasn't. I was scared. But I kept moving because stopping meant breaking. And mothers, real ones, don't get to break. When Daniel met Clara, I wanted to be hopeful. She was polite at first. Too polite. The kind of woman who measures every smile. Pretty, ambitious, always dressed like she was expecting applause. I remember the first dinner she came for. She complimented everything. The curtains, the tea, even the cat. But it was the way she said your house has such a classic smell that told me everything I needed to know. Over time, she started to redraw the space around me. Tiny comments that didn't sound like insults until they built a wall. Daniel doesn't need to worry about that. He's got enough stress at work. You should rest more. It's not good for your heart to handle finances. I can take care of him now. And just like that, I was moved out of my own life. I'd seen that look before, back when I was young and married, standing in front of my own mother-in-law, who once told me I talked too much for a woman who owned so little. I had vowed then to never make another woman feel small under my roof, and yet here I was, letting Clara shrink me inch by inch. Sometimes I wonder if aging isn't about losing years, it's about losing witnesses, people who remember who you used to be. Once they're gone, others rewrite your story for you. I blamed myself for a long time. Told myself maybe I was too old-fashioned. Maybe my expectations didn't fit their world. I tried to stay useful, brought meals, offered help with their apartment, gave advice when asked. But I could see it in Daniel's eyes. Every time she looked at me with that patronizing half smile, he flinched. Not for me, for himself. He didn't want to choose. So he didn't. He let her decide everything. What they bought, where they lived, who they saw. I told myself that's what love does. It makes men soft, pliable. But this wasn't softness. It was surrender. The morning of the wedding, that wasn't. I walked past the dress hanging in my closet. I touched the lace, my handiwork. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, so the stitches aren't perfect. Still, each thread held memory. I'd sewn it with the same care I once used to patch up soldiers, strangers, anyone who came through my ward broken. I guess I thought love could be stitched too, if you were patient enough. I took down the framed wedding photo of Samir and me. We were young, too poor to afford colour film, too proud to care. He had one hand on my shoulder, not possessive, just certain. I hadn't realized how much I missed that certainty until now. That day, I understood something bitter but true. Loyalty doesn't run in blood, it runs in character. And maybe Daniel had inherited more of the world than of me. The phone buzzed once on the table. A message from a neighbour. A photo of Daniel and Clara smiling at some garden ceremony. The caption read, "Beautiful day for love." I stared at it for a long while. The white of her dress looked too sharp, almost sterile, the kind of white that hides stains well. I didn't cry. I couldn't. There's a point beyond tears where everything just burns steady. So I closed the phone and whispered, "You have no idea what love costs." And somewhere between that whisper and the first sip of cold coffee, I made peace with something. I may not matter to them now, but I've survived far worse than being forgotten. That's when the reflection turned into resolve. I wasn't just mourning anymore. I was taking notes. By the third day, I'd had enough of silence. It wasn't grief anymore. It was insult. So I called, not to weep or plead. I just wanted to hear my son's voice and see what kind of man could stand inside that silence without choking on it. He answered on the second ring. For a moment, there was a flicker, familiar warmth, like the way he used to say "Ma" when he wanted something, but it faded quick. "Hey, Mum?" Flat. Careful. Like he was picking each word out of a box labelled fragile. "I heard," I said, "that you're married now." Silence again. Just the faint hum of traffic behind him. Then a short sigh. "Yeah," he said. "It all happened fast. We didn't want to make a big deal out of it." A big deal? The word hit like a cheap slap. "You didn't think your mother needed to know her son was getting married?" I kept my voice even. Decades in hospitals taught me how to sound calm while bleeding inside. He stammered something. "We were busy." It was small, but I could hear Clara in the background, whispering something. Then she said it herself, loud enough for me to catch every poisoned syllable. It was intimate, Mrs. Karim. Family only. That word again. Family. How easily some people redefine it. Then who was I all these years? I asked, not angry, not even hurt anymore. Just curious. A nurse with the same last name? She gave a little laugh. "You're being dramatic. It was just about convenience. We didn't have space, and—" "Stop." I didn't shout, but she stopped anyway. That tone only mothers learn. The one that ends conversation before it begins. "Tell me," I said softly, "what do you think you've won here?" There was rustling, a door shutting. Now it was just Daniel again. "Ma, please don't start." "Start? What?" I asked. "Caring? Asking why my son got married without me?" "You wouldn't have liked it," he said quickly. "You and Clara, it's just easier this way. No tension, no judgment." The words were strange in his mouth. He sounded like someone reading lines written by another. "Do you know what's funny, Daniel?" I said, voice trembling for the first time. "You always told me I was the strongest woman you knew. You said I taught you right from wrong. And now here you are, standing beside a woman who taught you how to forget that." He didn't respond. I waited. The quiet grew teeth. Then, very softly, I said, "You could have told me yourself." Instead, she told me I didn't matter. A long exhale on the line. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like?" He had no answer, so I said the only thing left. "You've made your choice. I'll remember it." And I hung up. I sat there for a while, phone still warm in my palm. The air in the house felt stale, used up. The walls seemed to echo their words back at me. "You wouldn't have liked it." No tension. That's what happens when people mistake your silence for peace. They think you're harmless. I walked through each room like a ghost, touching the furniture, the pictures. the tiny relics of a life built around people who were now strangers. My knees ached, but I kept moving. I needed to feel the weight of what I'd lost, physically, tangibly. By evening, I'd packed away the photo frames, not out of anger, out of clarity. Looking at them didn't bring him closer, it just made me smaller. When I finally sat down, I realized something cold and clean had replaced the ache. It wasn't rage. Rage is messy, loud. This was quieter, sharper, a kind of knowing. I thought about Clara's voice again, the way she said, family only, the way Daniel let her speak for him. There's something about being dismissed so completely that rearranges you. It strips you of illusions. I looked at my reflection in the glass window. My face wasn't the soft thing I used to recognize. There was a hardness now, one that didn't ask permission to exist. I took a deep breath and said it out loud. They think I'm powerless. The words sounded strange, like they belonged to someone new. Then, after a pause, I added, let them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there listening to the old house creak. Every sound was a memory. The radiator clicking like the clock Daniel used to wind, the pipes hissing like whispers behind walls. But beneath it all was something steady, a pulse of defiance I hadn't felt in years. I remembered how, as a nurse, I'd learned to hold composure even when faced with cruelty, the kind that comes from arrogance, from people who think money makes them untouchable. I'd seen it before. I could handle it again. I whispered into the dark, more to myself than to anyone. You've survived men dying in your arms, child. You can survive your son's disappointment. It was almost funny how strength sneaks back in, not with fire, but with stillness. Before I drifted off, I looked toward the hallway mirror one last time. The same woman stared back, but her eyes had changed. Not broken, not even sad, just awake. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet thought settled like a promise. They had taken my place in their story, but I was about to write my own ending. 3 nights later, the phone rang again. I almost didn't answer. Thought it might be one of those scam calls that start with congratulations. But fate has a dark sense of humor. It was Clara. Her voice wasn't the same this time. Gone was that polished, poised tone she wore like perfume. What came through was panic, unfiltered, trembling. "Mrs. Karim," she said, breathing hard. "Please, you have to help us. The venue's threatening to sue. They're saying the payment bounced." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard again. "The payment?" "Yes," she cried. "Daniel said he'd handle it, but something went wrong with the account. They're threatening to go public, post about it online. Please, we can't have that kind of humiliation." Humiliation. That word again. She said it like it was the end of the world. I stayed quiet. The kettle was whistling behind me, a thin shriek that felt almost fitting. "I don't know what to tell you, Clara," I said finally. "I wasn't at the wedding. It doesn't seem like my concern." She let out a small sob. I know. But this is serious. Daniel said maybe you could, just until we fix the bank issue. Maybe you could cover the bill? We'll pay you back, of course." I couldn't help it. I laughed. A low, bitter sound that startled even me. "So now I matter?" There was silence on her end. I imagined her in that modern apartment, clutching her phone like a lifeline, waiting for the woman she'd erased to save her. Then, softly, she said, "Please." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Clara," I said, my voice steady, "you married a man raised by a woman who learned to live on borrowed sleep and cold tea. I've paid for enough already. You'll have to fix this one yourself." And I hung up. But the call stayed with me. Not out of sympathy, out of curiosity. Something didn't fit. If Daniel was working at that firm, with the salary he bragged about, how could a venue payment bounce? I poured myself a cup of tea and went to my desk, the old oak one that still smelled faintly of disinfectant and dust. I hadn't opened the drawer in months. Inside were the documents, bank papers, account records, the file where Daniel's name appeared more often than my own. Back when he got his first job, I'd added him to my savings account, just in case. I thought I was being practical, responsible. What harm could it do? A son should be trusted. The thought made me nauseous now. I logged in online. My fingers shook as I typed the password, the one I'd used for years, my husband's initials and Daniel's birth date. Simple, sentimental, stupid. The numbers loaded slowly. At first it looked normal. Then I saw it, the transfers. Regular amounts, spaced months apart. Then larger ones, tens of thousands gone over 2 years. Recipient name, CM Holdings. I blinked. Clara's initials. I sat back, heart thudding, staring at the proof. She hadn't just wanted me out of their life. She'd been draining it. With my son's permission, or his ignorance, which felt no better. I opened my drawer again, found the old bank passbook with the handwriting of a younger me. Neat. Hopeful. I ran a finger down the columns, comparing balances. There was a time I'd been proud of that account. It was my proof of survival, my safety net. Now it was gone. I tried to remember the last time Daniel had asked to borrow something. Maybe it started small, just until payday. I'd said yes, because that's what mothers do. We don't count favors. We count years. But this wasn't borrowing. This was betrayal in decimal form. The teacup slipped from my hand and cracked on the floor. The sound was small, but final. I sat there until the sun rose, not moving, not thinking, just breathing through the dull pulse behind my eyes. When the first light hit the window, I stood and walked to the mirror again. I looked at the woman staring back and said aloud, "They've been planning my absence for years." And in that moment, something inside me went cold in the cleanest way possible. By noon, I'd called my friend Margaret. We'd worked together decades ago. She'd been a nurse once too, before retraining as a legal assistant. Her voice was calm as ever, almost too calm when I told her what I'd found. "You've been robbed," she said, plain and simple, "by my own son." She didn't sugarcoat it. "Then he's not your son anymore. He's an adult who made choices." That stung. But she was right. She told me to print everything, keep copies, and say nothing to them. "Not yet," she said. "Let them think you're still the same soft mother who'll forgive anything." I almost smiled. That softness was gone. It had died quietly sometime between the wedding call and the bank screen. When we hung up, I looked at the empty chair across from me. Samir's chair. "I finally learned your kind of silence," I whispered. "The kind that waits before it strikes." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. It sounded like applause. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt awake, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I had a reason to start planning. The next morning, I woke with a kind of stillness I hadn't felt since before Daniel was born. Not peace, clarity, the sort that sits in your stomach like a steady stone. I boiled water, not for tea this time, but to fill the house with sound while I thought. The whistle from the kettle always steadied me. In the hospital, I used to hum along with it before a hard shift. This felt similar. Preparing for surgery. Only this time I wasn't saving anyone. I spread the papers across the table, bank statements, old letters, anything with Daniel's signature. Each line told the story I'd been too blind to read. Slow, quiet theft, disguised as filial trust. I dialed Margaret again. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, "Come by." Her home smelled of old books and boiled coffee. She'd always been practical, the kind of woman who made sense of chaos by labeling it. We sat at her kitchen table while she put on her glasses and studied the printouts. She muttered, flipping through pages. "Consistent pattern. Regular withdrawals. Same beneficiary. She's using your money like a personal credit line." "She's clever," I said. Margaret glanced up. "Clever people get sloppy when they think no one's watching. You've been their shadow banker." The way she said "there" made it sound like a company. I suppose it was. A partnership built on my silence. "So what do I do?" She took off her glasses and looked me in the eye. You do nothing. Not yet. You let me contact someone I trust. Quietly. I nodded. Meanwhile, she said, gather everything. Proof, statements, even text messages if you have any. Don't alert them. Let them think you're still hurt, not suspicious. I can do that. She smiled faintly. You always could. Back home, I turned my grief into routine. I cooked as usual. I even sent Daniel a message, something gentle like, hope you're both settling in well. He replied an hour later, thanks, Ma. Things are great. Clara's starting a small business soon. She's been amazing. I almost laughed. Amazing, indeed. I deleted the message, but not before forwarding it to my own email. Proof of intent, Margaret had said. Every word, every lie, every drop of performance mattered. That night, I went through my closet and found an old tin box from the years after Samir died. Inside were the last papers he'd signed. Insurance documents, property deeds, the original title of the house. My handwriting was all over them, neat and certain. I ran my thumb along the embossed seal. It hit me then. This house, this life, was mine long before Clara knew how to fake kindness. They'd built their little empire on borrowed soil. The next few days, I lived two lives. To them, I was the forgiving mother. I sent a polite text on their 1-week anniversary. I even liked one of Clara's social media posts, a picture of their new kitchen. But privately, I was learning. I visited the bank in person. The manager, a man I'd known for years, frowned as he reviewed my records. You're saying you didn't authorize these transfers? No. He pursed his lips. Then you've been defrauded. Legally, we'll need a formal complaint. I kept my face calm. You'll have it. When I walked out, the wind felt different, brighter. I could smell rain coming. Margaret called 2 days later. I spoke to my contact. We're building the case. You'll get your money back. But that's not the point, is it? No, I said. It's not. Then what do you want? She asked quietly. I looked out the window. Daniel had texted earlier asking for recipes. A small, pathetic attempt at normal. I hadn't replied. I want her to know I saw through her, I said. And I want him to know what it cost. Then you'll have it, she said. Over the next week, we assembled everything. Bank logs, receipts, screenshots of messages where Clara mentioned her business. Margaret found out it was registered under CM Holdings, a company that existed only on paper. No office, no staff, no clients. Just an account. My account. I didn't sleep much that week. Instead, I organized files into folders labeled evidence and recovery. My hands shook sometimes, but not from fear, from focus. I was building a kind of order. By the weekend, the lawyer, a woman younger than Daniel but twice as sharp, told me what would happen next. We'll freeze the assets first, she said, then file a civil claim, quietly. If we're lucky, they won't even know until the letters arrive. Good, I said. Let them find out like I did. She gave a small smile. You really don't want revenge, do you? You want them to feel consequence. Exactly. That night, I stood by the window again, lights off. I could see the city glowing faintly in the distance. Somewhere out there, they were probably celebrating something small and meaningless. Maybe a dinner, maybe another photo to show how happy they were. Let them. Every lie, every theft, every cruel little omission. It was all paper now, and paper burns fast. I touched the cold glass and whispered, half to Samir, half to myself. They taught me to beg. I'll thank them when they learn to crawl. Then I turned off the light, sat down at my desk, and began writing my statement. Each sentence felt like stitching a wound closed, not to heal, but to make sure it never opened again. The letter went out on a Thursday morning. I didn't need to sign it myself. The lawyer handled that. Just a clean, unassuming envelope, carrying years of silence folded into legal weight. It took 3 days for the storm to reach them. I was in the garden, pruning the hydrangeas, when my phone started vibrating against the windowsill. Over and over. I didn't rush. Flowers teach you patience. Everything blooms in its own time. When I finally answered, Daniel's voice hit me first. Panicked, rushed, breaking in places. Ma, what the hell did you do? Language, I said. My tone was even, the same one I used to calm patients mid-panic. What seems to be the problem? The bank froze our accounts. They said there's an investigation. Fraud, unauthorized withdrawals. Clara's name is on everything. People are calling. Her friends, her boss. What did you tell them? I smiled without meaning to. The truth. He went quiet. Then, lower, colder. You could have just talked to me. I almost laughed. Like how you told me about your wedding? That silence again. The sound of a man realizing that the ground beneath him isn't solid anymore. You've destroyed us, he said finally. No, I said softly. You did that yourself. I just switched on the lights. I hung up. By evening, my phone had more missed calls than I'd had birthday wishes in the last decade. Clara tried too. Messages, voicemails that started with anger and slid into begging. I didn't respond. The lawyer told me everything was going as expected. The accounts frozen, the fake company flagged, the venue debt now attached to their names. The press wouldn't get wind of it. Not yet. But the people around them would. Reputations have their own way of leaking. The next morning, Margaret called. I heard from a friend at the registry. Clara's family's in chaos. Apparently the business she bragged about was her pride, and your money was the only thing keeping it afloat. She'll blame him? I said. She already has. I went still. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. More like justice landing quietly, like snow. That Sunday, Daniel came to the house. I saw his car through the curtain before he even knocked. My first instinct was to hide, but no. I'd hidden enough for one lifetime. He looked thinner, or maybe just smaller. When he spoke, his voice cracked like a boy's again. Ma, please. Clara's gone to her sister's. She says I ruined her life. I don't even know what to do. Start by telling the truth, I said. He rubbed his face. I didn't know she was using your money like that. I swear. I thought she had her own savings. I studied him for a long time. It's strange how love dulls your eyes. You stop seeing people as they are, and instead you look at who they were. I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a man too weak to protect the hands that fed him. Do you know what the worst part is? I said finally. Not that you took the money. Not even that you married her in secret. It's that when she mocked me, you said nothing. He looked up, eyes red. I didn't mean to hurt you. Hurt requires intent, I said. Neglect only needs cowardice. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I could see the apology forming, the one meant to soften the moment. But this wasn't a moment to be softened. I walked to the sideboard, opened the drawer, and took out the cufflinks I'd kept all these years. Silver, still gleaming, still his father's. I placed them on the table between us. These were meant for your wedding day. Now they'll remind you what a real man looked like. He stared at them, speechless. I didn't raise you to be weak, I said. But if weakness is what you've chosen, live with it. Don't bring it back here. He swallowed hard. Are you saying you don't want me around anymore? I'm saying I want peace, I said. And peace doesn't include people who mistake love for permission. I turned toward the window. He stood there for another few seconds, then left. The door shut quietly. No slamming, no shouting. Just finality. That night I poured myself a small glass of wine. I hadn't done that since Samir's funeral. The sky was dark, heavy with rain. But my house felt light. Not happy, not triumphant. Just cleared out. Margaret called again. He'll come around, she said. Maybe, I replied. But I'm not waiting for him this time. We talked a while. Two old women swapping stories of small victories. Hers about a stubborn landlord. Mine about a hollow marriage that wasn't mine to save. After we hung up, I stood by the window and whispered into the quiet. I paid for your wedding, Daniel. Just not the way you thought. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away. Inside, I felt still. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just exhales. I cleaned the table, folded away the papers, and put the cufflinks back in their box. Then I closed every light in the house except the one by Samir's photo. His quiet eyes seemed to say what I already knew. This wasn't revenge. It was equilibrium, restored, at last. The days after Daniel left felt quieter than any silence I'd known before. But it wasn't emptiness. It was space, the kind that appears when the noise finally stops. I kept the house simple. Open curtains, fresh sheets. I cooked for one without apology. Even Juniper, my cat, seemed lighter, curling against my legs as if she too could feel the air clearing. The lawyer called once more to confirm it was all done. The accounts unfrozen. The funds returned. The company Clara built with my savings had been dissolved, her name marked where it belonged, in the record of fraud and arrogance. The lawyer offered congratulations. I thanked her, though the word didn't fit what I felt. Victory wasn't the right shape. It was more like steady ground after years of standing on glass. Clara vanished. Rumours drifted through town, something about debt, about shame. I didn't chase them. People like her always find a new room to enter, a new stage to stand on. She'd reinvent herself somewhere else, and that was fine. My story was finished with her. Daniel stayed, or rather lingered. Calls at first, then letters slipped under the door. I didn't answer, not out of cruelty, but out of need. Sometimes love must go without reply to learn its lesson. One letter I did open. It was short, written in his slanted, uncertain hand. He said he'd been blind, that he'd chosen comfort over conscience, that he missed me, that he finally understood what I'd meant all those years when I told him love without respect is just dependency in disguise. I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer with the bank papers. Proof that sometimes truth arrives too late, but arrives nonetheless. Weeks passed, then months. Autumn came. Soft, brown light through the kitchen windows, the kind that turns dust into gold. I began walking every morning, slow and steady. People nodded hello. Some even stopped to talk again. It felt strange, being seen not as someone's mother or someone's victim, but simply as myself. One afternoon, I visited Samir's grave. The grass had overgrown a little, so I brushed it away. I told him about everything. The wedding, the betrayal, the reckoning. How I'd found my voice not in shouting, but in restraint. You'd have liked that, I said quietly. You always said patience was the last stage of strength. A wind passed through the trees then, soft and approving. I took it as an answer. That evening, I sat by the window with my tea. The hydrangeas outside had browned, still standing tall. They reminded me of myself, weathered but rooted. The world beyond my glass moved on. Children laughing down the street, cars passing, a life that didn't ask for explanation. For a long time I thought justice would feel grand, maybe even joyful. But it isn't like that. It's smaller, quieter. It's the absence of fear when you check the mail. The peace of knowing no one holds your name hostage anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I think of Daniel as a boy again, standing in the doorway waiting for me after my shifts, holding his blanket and smiling. I let the image stay only a moment, then let it go. Memory should be visited, not lived in. Before bed, I looked into the hallway mirror, the same one that once reflected my humiliation, then my fury. The woman looking back now wasn't young, but she was whole. Her face had lines, yes, but they were carved by survival, not defeat. They mistook my silence for weakness, I whispered. My reflection held my gaze, steady, knowing. Then I turned off the light, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back.